Okay, today's video is called "The Struggle is Real and Good." So, I want to talk a little bit about why I think it's a good thing if you feel like you're struggling in life. And maybe you notice that other people don't seem to be, or they don't seem to be struggling very much. There's a certain sense that some people are moving through life so kind of gracefully and effortlessly, like they can manage and juggle everything, and they can handle everything, and um, and certainly it's easy to kind of to look at that from the outside and think that that's some kind of desirable way to live, or that indeed is a possible way to live. And I think this is a really harmful view to have. It's an easy view to have, and certainly we're being sold this message, that um, that like if you get everything in your life just right, your life will just flow, uh, effortlessly without any struggle. And and certainly some people do a good job at presenting their own life in that way, especially through social media and you know making everything appear to be so amazing, so perfect. And and maybe that is true to some extent, that maybe it's possible that there is a way to go through life without really having like a internal struggle. So we have the internal struggle, external struggle, and they're obviously very closely related. um, the external is very difficult and sometimes impossible to have control over. Like you can't always control what's going to happen to you. And certainly in Buddhism we talk a lot about the kind of role of suffering or unsatisfactoriness in life, that it's an inevitable part of life, that pain and sickness and death and loss and grief and sadness, all of these things are coming our way no matter what we do. Or maybe maybe we won't not everyone's going to experience old age and the kind of suffering and struggle of old age, um, but many of us will. And so whatever we do, however we arrange our lives, however kind of lucky we are, we can't avoid at least a certain amount of difficulty and challenges on the external side of things. And so, we hear things like um, obstacles are opportunities, and that's a good view to have. That it kind of helps us to embrace the obstacles, to embrace the challenges, and we know that like that's when we learn, that's when we grow, that's when we evolve. But in this video, I want to talk more specifically about the internal struggle and the idea that getting rid of that, or not wanting that to be the case, not wanting to kind of feel that way, and a large part of that is kind of influenced by this idea that maybe it doesn't have to be this way, or maybe it's possible to not have this feeling. Maybe it's possible to go through life effortlessly and gracefully. And certainly, again, that's an idea that we're being sold. That's an idea that many people are kind of uh, choosing to portray themselves as having and as embodying. And so there's a whole number of factors that kind of lead into our rejection, or I think the main thing is like it tends to make us feel that something is wrong with us, right? Maybe you felt that way before. It's like you see other people who kind of appear to be fine, and yet you're struggling. And so we can easily feel like, oh, there's something wrong with me in particular. There's something about me, there's something about my mind, there's something about the way my mind works. And I have this kind of personal existential crisis, and other people don't seem to have it. One question to ask is like, okay, if you feel that way, how many of your friends and family members and coworkers and people that you know, how many of those people know that about you? So, it maybe depends on your personality and how open you are about this kind of internal struggle, but when we reflect, we might find that, or actually even better, when we start to open up about this to other people. One thing that I've noticed in the last couple of years, I've been opening up about it more and more, and I've had some friends who've known me pretty well, and they were pretty surprised. Oh, really? I thought you seem really stable and like you've got it together and all this. And I'm like, I don't know. It's like it reveals that from the outside, from the other person's perspective, um, people don't really know what we're going through, right? They just have some idea, and it's based on the way we talk. It's based on the way that we appear. Like if we appear to kind of be up or down, or happy or sad, or conflicted or peaceful, you know, it can be based on the things that we say. It can be based on the pictures that we post on social media, or the things that we write about ourselves or about life. And when we reflect on this and we kind of unpack it a bit, we find that maybe some people have some idea of what it's like to be me, but they don't have the full story. And certainly there are things that I haven't shared, or that people don't know about me for one reason or another. Maybe I've just haven't shared it, and maybe that's intentionally, or it just kind of hasn't come up, or there was never a situation, or maybe I'm not that clear about it, or maybe I don't want to talk about it with certain people or with anyone. I don't know. All of these things are probably true to some extent. So when we see that, okay, nobody really knows what it's like to be us, so can we assume that's also true the other way around, that we don't really know what it's like to be anyone else? We can take it a step further. Do we even really know what it's like to be us? It's like, well, nobody else knows, but do I even know? Am I very clear about what it's like to be me? That's a interesting question, and maybe a topic for another video. So anyway, now we've kind of broken down and kind of dethroned this image that some people aren't struggling. Some people are moving through life effortlessly and gracefully. And that's such a attractive model or ideal that we can hold in our mind, that, you know, that's what I want. And the fact that that's not my experience means that there's something wrong with me, and that what I'm experiencing and the way I'm kind of interpreting life or something about me is wrong. Something's messed up. I need to fix that. I want to get away from that. I want to move towards that other kind of life that some people seem to be having. So let's say that we can't assume that's even possible. Although a little bit later I want to come back to that from like with the perspective of the Buddha's teachings to see what the Buddha might say about this. But for now, based on our logic of like, nobody knows what it's like to be me, so how do I really know what it's like to be anyone else? I can guess, I can observe, I can try to piece things together, but my ability to do so accurately is limited, and I very well may be wrong, about certain things. So then we can kind of dethrone that and say like, all right, well, we don't really know about other people, and since we don't really know about other people, let's put that aside for now. As I say in many videos, the invitation in Buddhism is really to reel it back in. It's like, okay, well, let's use our own life as the laboratory, because that's what we really have the most access to. And again, it's problematic still, because there's ignorance, there's delusion, there's confusion. It's not like we really know what's going on with us. How much do you really know about your own body or your mind or the way they interact, or there's there's a lot of possible information and knowledge to kind of to tap into, and a lot of it is kind of like unnecessary, perhaps unnecessary to know all the little details. But what we're hoping to do is kind of like come to some sort of understanding that allows us to navigate the struggle that we're feeling, and to recognize that maybe we don't need to try to get rid of it, and maybe it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with us. And I would take that a step further, and I would say that it's a good thing. I really believe, not all the time, but I come back to this idea that like, I wouldn't want it any other way. I wouldn't want to go through life without feeling this internal struggle. Sometimes it's kind of like anxiety or depression or feeling lost, feeling confused, like you're not sure what the point is or the direction you're going, and and feeling overwhelmed. So if you have experienced this kind of stuff, then you ask, like, what's your relationship to that experience? Are you inviting of it or rejecting it? Do you appreciate it, or do you just want to get rid of it and you hate it and you would rather not experience it? So why am I saying that it might be a good sign that some people struggle with this more, the kind of internal existential suffering, why could that be a good sign about you? And I think that the answer, if we can come back to, the Buddha's teaching of dukkha, which is often translated as suffering or unsatisfactoriness, it's like there is a strong element of unsatisfactoriness in life. And let's just say that if we were kind of living in a way where that didn't feel to be our experience, I would say most likely there's something wrong with that person. And what could that be? Well, the first thing that comes to mind is ignorance is bliss. So it's like, okay, maybe some people are like, um, just kind of in this amazing flow where they're not really struggling at like a deeper level. Maybe that's just because they're not really aware of the way things are. So as we practice, and as meditation and mindfulness, yoga, as we study and we read and we kind of talk to people, we open up to more and more, to kind of unpeel the layers of the way things really are. And it's scary. There's a lot of things that we discover that are uncomfortable. There's a lot of things that we have to face about life and about ourselves that are ugly and scary and unsettling and uncertain. So we often talk about like, the rug gets pulled out from under us, because if maybe before we start practicing, we think everything is like so stable and predictable and solid, and for sure I'm gonna do this tomorrow, and kind of living in this fantasy world. And then we start recognizing the way things are, and it's like all of that goes away. We have another principle from the Buddha, which is anicca, which is the law of impermanence. It's like nothing is unchanging, nothing is that steady or stable. Everything is always moving and shifting and falling apart, and everything will come to an end. And it's like, it freaks us out. Like, there's no guarantees, other than death. Like, I'll see you tomorrow. Are you sure? Yeah, I'm sure. No. Can't really say that anymore. It's like, once you know, if you can say that, but it's kind of like, it's just, you can see through it, that it's like, yeah, I can promise you that I'm going to show up at your house tomorrow. But I also know that, like, I might not even be alive tomorrow. Or you might not even be alive. Or so many things could happen, you know? So when we kind of open up to expose ourselves to the reality of some of this, it can take away the ground that we're standing on. And then, like, what do we do next? Well, I think embracing the uncertainty, embracing the struggle, that it's like there's got to be a sense of courage, a curiosity and willingness to be like, to kind of make ourselves strong enough to face those things that are the least comforting, right? And so this morning we were walking through the village on alms round with the bull, and the village life here is, it's quite, I mean, northeast Thailand, it's very, very simple, and very laid back and quite traditional. And I can kind of see I can kind of see that some people, the look on their face is like, you can see so much struggle, and just like a lifetime of hard work, never ending responsibility, and barely scraping by, and a lot of sacrifice but not that much return. Never really getting ahead, never really coming to an end of the struggle. And when you see that, it's like, oh, especially when people are much older, and you think, you know, we can check, like, are you telling yourself that maybe someday you're not going to feel this way anymore? I find myself, I catch myself falling into this trap a lot. It's like, oh yeah, I'm struggling right now, but that's because of like A, B, and C. And like, if I can just fill in the blank, then I'm gonna be like in that flow, you know? And I think that's, I think that's delusional. And I think that kind of delusional thinking is what makes us less able, less willing to embrace the struggle right now, to see that, the struggle is real and it's guaranteed for the most part, and it's a good thing. So it's like, when we're exposing ourselves willingly, we're signing up this kind of spiritual practice or opening the mind. It's like we're signing up for a more difficult life in many ways, because we're kind of removing that the veil of the fantasy, the promise of the fantasy, or the veil of ignorance. That it's like, we could choose to not pay attention to these more difficult truths, and our lives would be easier. So it's a good sign that we're feeling this way. It doesn't mean anything is wrong with us. I mean, you know, sometimes there might be, I don't know. And sometimes it's definitely worth getting help sometimes from a professional, or maybe sometimes medication is needed, therapy, you know, having a mentor or friends. I think it's good to talk about this stuff either way. And I think the more that we talk about it, the more we'll realize that, oh yeah, that's actually a very common way to experience life, is that there's like this feeling that it's more difficult for me than the other people around me. There's something specific about me that makes my life harder than the people around me. And it's like, okay, well, if you start talking to everyone and then we all kind of say the same, yeah, that's how I felt too. Then we think, oh, well, either there's something very special about all of us, or maybe that's not really true. And then if some people are like, no, it's not, that's not the way for me, it's like, okay, well, to what extent are they ignoring those heavier truths? To what extent are they perhaps avoiding that, kind of taking a long, hard look at yourself type thing? with that curiosity, with the willingness, with that courage to face the truth, to face the reality about yourself. That's such a important thing to be doing. And you can get lost down the rabbit hole. You can get sucked into the black hole. You can get swept away by the tide of uncertainty and negative character traits, and you can get overwhelmed by the whole load of it. So there's two extremes here, right? One is to be completely swept away by the joys and the pleasure and the bliss of life, like, oh, life is so amazing and everything is so beautiful and everyone is so beautiful, and it's like it we might find that we're attracted to that whole thing, but if we take a closer look, we might find that it's probably not realistic. There's something fake about it, or there's something missing there. It's not the whole story. Then, we can get swept away by the other side, down and out, kind of drowning in the pain of being alive, in the kind of confusion and the darkness and the insecurities. And that's easy to get sucked in. Like, it's easy to practice and kind of become more aware and then get sucked into that way. Because it's like the evidence for those truths will be piling up and they'll be unavoidable. And a lot of people, there's a certain point where a lot of people start to see that, and that's when they quit. They're like, screw this, I'm going back to the ignorance is bliss. I can't handle all these truths. I'm just going to pretend that I never saw it in the first place. So the invitation here is maybe to kind of sit in the middle and just be aware, right? Notice when times are good, notice when times are tough. And if we kind of carry this heavy feeling through life most of the time, that like even when times are good, we're like, yeah, but there's still this darkness, there's still this pain, there's still this sadness. And then we check, okay, but what are we telling ourselves about that? What are we telling ourselves about ourselves because of that? And if we're telling ourselves that there's something wrong with us, or that it's kind of like it's our fault, or something specific about us that's causing us to feel this way, and not everyone else is feeling that way. If that's the story that we're telling ourselves about ourselves, that makes it so much worse. So my invitation today is tell yourself a different story about yourself. And you can say, it's a good thing. It's a good sign about myself that I'm feeling this way today. It's a good indicator that I'm opening up, that I'm willing to see the heavy truths. I'm willing to carry them. I'm willing to carry the burden of the struggle of life. That like there's this deeper yearning to be free from that. But yet here I am still struggling with it. And that's a good sign. That means something is working. But if you don't, if we're not careful, it's dangerous. It is dangerous, you know, and that's why I'm talking about it, because it's like I've seen people go into the dark side or go into hopelessness and, you know, addiction and suicide and get really lost because they did tap into something but didn't have any way to understand it or make sense of it or to navigate it. So we're going to say, okay, we're sitting in the middle of all the great things about life and all the kind of difficult things about life. We find this middle way where we're able to hold both truths at the same time and kind of keep them balanced. It's like when we start to get swept away by the heavy side, we kind of remind ourselves that it's not always that way, and sometimes things are pretty good. Same is true on the other side. When things are really good, it's like it's skillful to kind of remind yourself, like, yeah, but this is only part of it. Like, good. Let me appreciate these good times. Let me enjoy myself a little bit. But not getting swept away by that, because we know that that's also impermanent and it's going to come to an end. And the more we kind of hold on to those good times, thinking that, like, this is the real purpose of life and this is the real me when I'm happy. You know, how many times have you kind of come out of a state of feeling a bit depressed and then you kind of get lifted up again and you're like, I'm back. This is the real me. No, it's not. You know, that's another delusion. It's all you, you know. And the best when there's a spectrum and it's like this over here is you and this over here is you, the best place to position yourself is in the middle. And then you can kind of lean to the right or to the left, and then you can recover from that instead of getting catapulted back and forth, you know, like a ping pong ball with no control over it and no kind of composure. So as I said, I wanted to, at the end here, I want to mention perhaps like what the Buddha's promise is about this. Well, the Buddha teaches that, you know, suffering is an inevitable part of life, but it's possible, and it's our kind of innate potential as living sentient beings to find the end of suffering. And so we're like, oh, okay, so, you know, there is hope. It is possible to go through life without this kind of internal struggle. The Buddha says yes, but what I'll say is that, yeah, but it's not easy and it's not very common, and it's not what we're seeing when we're kind of assuming that certain people on Instagram are living without this internal struggle. That's definitely not what the Buddha was talking about. And what is the path to get to the end of suffering, according to the Buddha? This is it. It's the path of going deeper, more fully head on, with full courage into the suffering, down and deep into the heavy, the dark aspects of life, aspects of the mind. in another video, I defined the Buddha's concept of enlightenment as the complete eradication of greed, hatred, and delusion in the mind. Well, how do you think you get rid of greed and hatred and anger and delusion? How do you get rid of something that you don't know very well? Good luck. So a lot of the practice is like become more aware. Become more aware of what? Of what? Become more aware of the greed and hatred and delusion and these forces of evil within your own heart. And you're like, okay, so how long do I have to do that for? A long time, you know? And what is that process going to look like? It's going to get worse before it gets better. You know? It's one of those things. It's like you go in and you embrace the struggle, you embrace the difficulty, not so simply as like, oh, the obstacle's an opportunity. That's a good attitude to have, but it's a bit, you know, it's a bit light. It's a bit like it's a good technique for like when you're facing an obstacle. This is something much deeper, much heavier. That's like, yeah, but what if we just can barely manage being alive? It's not necessarily like we're facing an external obstacle at this moment. Maybe everything externally is kind of pretty good, actually. But yet, can't get out of bed or kind of can't wake up fully or can't get over this kind of something that's like weighing us down. And it's like, okay, maybe that's a good thing. It's not easy. It ain't fun. But maybe it's a good sign. And it's a and yet we know that it's we have to be careful, because if we're not careful, it can kind of destroy us. But if we change the story and we say, I'm feeling this way because I'm facing reality. And I'm learning to hold it. And I'm learning to sit in the middle and kind of see both sides. And I'm trying to stay steady. I'm trying to be mindful. But I'm not trying to sugarcoat it anymore. I'm not trying to run away from the uncomfortable feelings. It's like we want to like make ourselves bigger so that we can hold all of it. So the last thing I'll say here is that like my teacher at the monastery here where I'm living, I believe is a fully enlightened being, which means that I believe that he has found the end of suffering that the Buddha promised. But what does that mean? Does that mean that everything is perfect for him, that he's always happy? No. That's not realistic, because it's important to know that the suffering that the Buddha promised we can find the end of is the mental side of suffering. But my teacher is 78, I think, 77 or 78. And, his body's kind of falling apart. And it doesn't matter who you are, like, that's not going to be fun. It's not going to be fun to get old and to kind of go through that slow, agonizing process. Like, he's in a lot of pain a lot of times, and there's some things that are not functioning correctly sometimes, and sometimes he'll get really sick for like a long period, and like that's gonna suck no matter who you are. So it's not that like he's always so bright and cheerful and happy and like he's just on cloud nine all the time. Sometimes you can kind of see in his face he's like patiently enduring like severe pain. But there's also there is a kind of steady composure to him that seems unwavering. And that is the mental side that seems to be unaffected by the physical or external side. So it's kind of like no matter what happens, no matter how much pain is in his body, no matter how, hungry or hot or cold or tired he is, it's kind of like steady, clear, composed, calm. So the end of suffering that the Buddha promised is like to not add more suffering to whatever is inevitable in life. Sickness, old age, disease, injury. That's coming our way no matter what. But what we do with that and how we respond to that, how we react to that, it's not entirely up to us, because it's a process to kind of make progress. But that's what the spiritual path is. It's like learning to hold the kind of burden of life and to be clear about it and to be willing to admit it's hard. And also seeing that is ultimately a good sign. It's a good thing. It means most of the time that we're moving in the right direction, and yet, we know that there are pitfalls. We know that there are slippery slopes. It can be dangerous. We might need help. We might need guidance, from a teacher or a friend or a mentor, someone who's been there and can kind of help us to avoid, getting swept away into that heavy, dark side. But what we can do now for sure is start to recognize it. Like, oh yeah, now I'm feeling that way again. It's not really because of the external situation. Then notice, what am I telling myself about this story about myself? Am I telling myself there's something wrong with me? Notice that. Then you're kind of like, oh yeah, there it is. And when you notice it, you kind of just can let it go. You're like, that's not really, you can remind yourself, it's not really true. So you just taking a step back. You kind of see all this unfold. Notice how you feel. Then you can get more curious. How does that feel? How does that kind of existential crisis feel? How does the struggle feel? And then ask yourself, can I be okay with that? Can I allow myself to feel this way? And not only patiently endure it, but kind of remind, a little bit of coaching, like, it's actually a good sign. That like, by feeling this way, I have the opportunity to find this center, to expand my container, and to learn to sit with this and to hold it, and to learn to be okay, even though, like, at some level we're not feeling okay, but that's just an interpretation of a feeling. So we go deeper into the feeling and examine the feeling, and then we're like, well, maybe I can be okay with this feeling. Maybe I can even befriend this feeling. That's like, it feels a little uncomfortable in this region, and it's a kind of feels like a slow sort of mild agony, yearning, or whatever. And you're like, all right, well, how bad is it? How bad is the actual feeling? And then notice, to what extent am I making it worse by the way I'm interpreting it? We might find like the actual experience, the actual physical feeling isn't that bad. And maybe I can just learn to be okay with it and breathe and relax and know there's nothing wrong with me, and you know be curious and be willing to learn something here, and see, maybe we can uncover some things. Why do we feel this way? You might find that the feeling itself is coming from the expectation for it to be different, or the belief that I should be really happy right now because he is or she is. What's wrong with me? So what happens if we kind of let go of that belief? How does that affect that internal struggle? There's a lot of work to do here, and it takes time, and certainly I haven't figured anything out, but there's a lot of there's something beautiful about bearing witness to this whole thing, and bringing a kind of kind attention and curiosity. So I hope that's helpful in some way. Feel free to leave any comments or reach out to me if you have something to share or you want to discuss something, because this is a topic that's very kind of close to my heart, something that I've sort of struggled with a lot and still am, that and so just letting people know that you're not alone, and it's okay, and it's it's a good thing. It's not an easy thing, but it's a good thing. And so take care of yourself. Be careful. Be aware, but be careful, and seek help. Reach out. Pay attention to what the message is, and pay attention to what you might need. Okay, so thank you very much, and I'll see you again soon.